The wind hit at 150 miles per hour. It came through the open waist window like a wall. Not cold in any ordinary sense of the word. Cold that had no name. Cold that worked through the heated flight suit, through the wool, through the skin, and into the bone itself. At 25,000 feet, the temperature outside was 40 below zero. The aircraft was not pressurized. There was no cabin. There was no warmth. There was only the aluminum skin of a flying machine between the gunner and open sky, and that skin was less than an inch thick. The spent brass cartridge casings rolled across the floor beneath his boots. The .50 caliber Browning shook in his hands. Somewhere above him, another formation was dropping its bombs. He could not look up. He could not stop firing. The Luftwaffe was already inside the formation. The waist gunner occupied the most exposed position on the B-17 Flying Fortress. Not the most famous, not the most celebrated, the most exposed. He stood at an open window cut into the side of the fuselage, mid-aircraft, with nothing between himself and the sky except the barrel of his machine gun and whatever luck remained to him. In the early design, two waist gunners were positioned directly opposite each other inside the same narrow section of fuselage. They were close enough to collide on every movement. A single burst from a German fighter, one pass, one accurate line of cannon fire through the aluminum skin, could kill or wound both men simultaneously. The position required a man to move a 40-pound weapon against a slipstream that wanted to tear it from his hands. It required him to stand on a floor covered in rolling brass. It required him to breathe through an oxygen mask that could freeze shut at altitude and kill him without a single bullet fired in his direction. 70% of bomber crew wounds came not from direct cannon hits, but from low-velocity shrapnel, flak fragments, jagged and irregular, punching through thin metal. The fuselage offered no real protection. The aircraft was, in the end, a vehicle, not a fortress. The name was aspirational. This was where they put the men. By 1943, the 8th Air Force was fighting a war of attrition it was not certain it could win. The strategic bombing campaign over occupied Europe demanded daylight precision. The RAF bombed at night to reduce fighter interception. The Americans flew in daylight, and they paid for it in men. The B-17G formation, known as the combat box, placed dozens of aircraft in a staggered three-dimensional arrangement designed to concentrate defensive fire. A formation of 36 B-17s could theoretically bring 700 defensive machine guns to bear on an attacking fighter. Theoretically. In practice, the Luftwaffe had already adapted. German fighter pilots had learned that attacking from the rear was prohibitively costly. From that angle, a B-17 required approximately 20 direct hits from 20 Mimosini cannon shells to bring down. At the average German pilot's accuracy rate of roughly 2%, that translated to 1,000 rounds per bomber. The math was unsustainable. So the Luftwaffe changed the math. The attack, known to American crews as 12 o'clock high, came in head-on from a slightly elevated angle, at combined closing speeds approaching 600 miles per hour. The engagement window lasted 2 seconds. The nose of the B-17 was thinly armored. 4 or 5 well-placed shells from the front could accomplish what 100 could not accomplish from behind. But the rear was never abandoned. It was never safe. Fighters developed the pattern the crews called the tail gunner's headache, approaching from both sides of the formation simultaneously, diving at the rear in 10-second intervals, rolling away after each pass, forcing the tail and waist gunners to track multiple targets from multiple angles at once. Later came the Sturmböcke, Focke-Wulf 190s fitted with additional cockpit armor and 30 mm cannons, pressing their attacks to within 150 meters before firing. At that range, a single round could destroy a control surface or kill a man outright. The waist gunner watched all of it come at him from the open window. Before long-range escort fighters were available, the gunners flew without meaningful protection for hundreds of miles over enemy territory. The P-51 Mustang did not arrive in sufficient numbers to escort bombers deep into Germany until early 1944. Until then, the men in the waist windows fired their Brownings alone. The oxygen mask was their lifeline at altitude. When it froze, when moisture in the breath crystallized in the tube and sealed the line, a man had minutes before hypoxia took his ability to think. He might feel warmth, a strange comfort. Then, nothing. The heated flight suit ran on aircraft power. If the connection was severed, if the suit failed, if the wiring was damaged by enemy fire, the man wearing it had perhaps 20 minutes before frostbite began to destroy his extremities. Fingers went first, then hands. The ability to grip the gun, to traverse it, to pull the trigger, gone. The slipstream at operational altitude carried ice. It entered through the open window and coated the ammunition feed, the gun barrel, the gunner's goggles. Visibility dropped. The gun could jam. The man could barely stand. In early 1943, the statistical probability of surviving a full 25-mission combat tour was approximately 1 in 4. 3 out of every 4 crews would be shot down, killed, or captured before completing their tour. The 8th Air Force suffered more casualties than any other command in the American military during the Second World War. 26,000 men killed in action, 28,000 taken prisoner. The waist gunner stood at his open window and watched the fighters come. There came missions when the math turned absolute. A single burst of cannon fire through the fuselage could take both waist gunners before either man knew the fighter had made its pass. The aluminum skin failed. Shrapnel traveled the interior of the aircraft in every direction. A man could be wounded and not know it immediately. The cold masked sensation, masked pain, masked the first understanding that something was wrong. He might fire for another 30 seconds before the body registered what had happened. When the aircraft itself was mortally struck, when an engine exploded, when a fuel tank ignited, when a wing spar failed, the crew had seconds to act. The forward crew members moved to their hatches. The navigator and bombardier exited through the nose, the pilot and co-pilot through the cockpit. The waist gunners were close to the main fuselage door. Close, but close was not the same as safe. In a spinning aircraft, centrifugal force pressed a man against the walls. Fire could block the exit. Structural failure could seal a hatch shut. A parachute shredded by gunfire was 30 pounds of useless silk. There was no second option. Not every man waited passively for the end. Eugene Moran, assigned as tail gunner aboard the B-17F nicknamed Ricochet of the 96th Bombardment Group, was alive inside a section of aircraft that no longer existed as a flyable machine when it struck the ground near Bremen on November 29, 1943. The tail section had separated from the forward fuselage after German fighters overwhelmed the lone stricken bomber that had drifted from formation. 8 of the 10 crew members were dead. The tail section fell from 28,000 feet spinning through the sky over occupied Germany. Moran fired his twin Brownings at the German fighters that continued to press attacks against what appeared to them to be a controlled, unknown Allied aircraft. He was shooting at enemy fighters from inside a piece of wreckage, falling 4 miles without a parachute. The section struck trees near the town south of Bremen. The impact cracked his skull. Both forearms were broken. Several ribs were shattered. 2 Serbian prisoners of war, who were also physicians, witnessed the crash and reached him before German forces did. They treated his wounds in the field. A Serbian surgeon later placed a metal plate over the exposed section of his skull. He had survived by a margin too narrow to calculate. Moran spent 17 months as a prisoner of war. Between February and April of 1945, as the Third Reich contracted and collapsed, he was force-marched 600 miles with other prisoners through a German winter. He was liberated by American troops at Bitterfeld on April 26, 1945. He weighed 128 pounds. The 8th Air Force lost 4,754 B-17s in combat. 37% of every Flying Fortress produced in American factories never returned. For RAF Bomber Command, flying primarily at night, the numbers across the full war were starker still. Of every 100 men who joined, 51 were killed on operations, 9 more died in training accidents before reaching combat, 12 were taken prisoner. Among the dead were approximately 20,000 rear gunners. That figure was documented by the Yorkshire Air Museum. 20,000 men in the most isolated position on the aircraft. The average age across Bomber Command crews was 21. The numbers do not explain the man. They do not explain what it meant to stand at an open window in 40 below air, with a gun that might freeze and a suit that might fail, watching the fighters come from every direction knowing the aircraft around you offered nothing real in the way of protection. The men who survived did so through skill, through discipline, through the specific fortune of an enemy burst that missed by feet rather than inches. They did not survive because the position was survivable. They survived despite it. What endures is not the machinery, not the statistics, not the formations or the tactics or the names of the aircraft. What endures is the fact that men climbed into those windows, connected their oxygen lines, checked their guns, and waited. Mission after mission. In silence. Alone.